Hi, everyone. Thank you for watching this video. I'm Brooke Tully, and today I'm happy to share about how you can create your conservation movement using behavioral insights and communication strategies to protect the planet, and even to protect the nature in your own neighborhood. I want to start with some context setting, where we find ourselves today. Many of us feel this urgent need to get more people engaged and actively involved in our conservation and sustainability efforts. This can include everything from scooping the poop, getting people to volunteer, reducing food waste at home and composting, recycling more, and even reducing our reliance on single-use plastics. In an effort to get more people engaged and involved, we put a lot of messages out there in a lot of different places. Some things that may look like this. Yet we tend to find ourselves feeling like we're not gaining the momentum or the traction that we would ideally like to see among our audiences. We're not seeing them get actively involved. And this leaves us feeling pretty frustrated, chewing on the pencils, hitting our head against the wall, frustrated, wondering why aren't people doing the things that we're asking them to do? And this frustration can lead us to blame our audience in some ways, feeling like they don't care, they don't want to, they're not trying, they're disinterested, they're disconnected, and so on. But the hard truth here is that our traditional communication approaches, like some of the ones I showed in the previous slide, aren't working hard enough for us. We spend too much time focusing only on awareness of the problem, as opposed to the solutions. We spend too much time focusing on what not to do, as opposed to what people could be doing or doing more of. We use shame and guilt to get people to care. We use doom and gloom and fear of loss to spark action. Yet study after study shows us that these ingredients do not lead to action and change. They don't effectively motivate our audience for the long haul. So it's time for us to flip the script. We need to move away from these traditional approaches that aren't working hard enough for us and focus on approaches that will truly engage, inspire, and motivate our audiences. And the truth is, most of our audience is ready for these kinds of messages. They are open and willing to take action, to make change, to adopt planet-friendly behaviors, if we speak to them and engage with them in a way that is meaningful and really resonates. That's what we'll talk about a lot today. Now, certainly, creating a conservation movement, it helps to start with understanding how social movements happen in the first place. And I want to use an analogy here that I think many of us can relate to and maybe have experienced, and that's the wave. So if you go to a sporting event, you're in a stadium or an arena, maybe you have experienced the wave before, where everyone raises their hands up, get out of their seats, and it happens sort of in sync around the stadium. Maybe you're one of those folks that like to start the wave. So let's think about how the wave happened, because it tends to follow a similar pattern no matter where we are. And that is some of those individual brave folks who, likely with a group of friends or family members, decide, hey, let's start the wave. They get up out of their seats and they do it. It's a handful of folks. And maybe nobody else follows them right away and they try to do it again. And then you'll notice in another part of the stadium, there's another handful of people over there, another handful of folks over there. And they see this getting started and say, oh, they're starting the wave, let's get in on this. And then very quickly, it starts to spread. And I'll show this little GIF here on the screen. You can see it just happens in this sort of uniform, sync way across thousands and thousands of strangers who all join in and start to form this. In many ways, I just feel like this is a phenomenal social event that happens around the stadium. And you may be someone like me who lets that wave pass by a few times, says, oh goodness, is this really happening? Is the wave happening? And it comes by enough times that I decide I might as well just join in. The social pressure is big enough. And frankly, I don't feel like being the odd person out. So this visual helps us think about a theory that underpins how social movements happen. This is my favorite theory, if it's not too nerdy to have a favorite theory, called the diffusion of innovation theory. And it describes how, why, and at what rate new ideas and technology, and even adoption of behaviors spread among a given audience and community. And so let's keep that wave analogy in mind as we walk through this. We're going to start in the bottom left corner here, the innovators. That is a very small group of folks who are willing to just go out there and take a risk and try something new to start the wave. Like this gentleman here in the corner, he's trying to start the wave at Wimbledon. Wimbledon is not a place that's known for its expressive fanfare, but he's willing to take that risk, not knowing if anyone's going to follow him, maybe not even all that concerned about whether or not someone's going to follow along. They took the initiative upon themselves to do it. After the innovators, you have the early adopters. So they're probably not going to be the ones that start that wave or that movement, but they'll be right there, right behind that first person who does it. So if we think about that pocket, a handful of people that start the wave in the stadium, early adopters are the other pockets that see that person and then jump on in. These two groups tend to form our wheelhouse in sustainability and conservation. They're our core followers. They're the ones that show up to every event, that will sign every petition, and that will get actively involved. And they don't need much from us in order to do that. You tell me plastic straws are bad for the ocean, I'm done with plastic straws for life. Right? They don't need that much encouragement or motivation. But that next group, the early majority, this is a much larger group. And they tend to be a bit more selective in what they join in on. So they want to see that other people are doing it. They want to know what's meaningful or beneficial for them to do it. They want to be sure that it's going to have an impact and make it worth their time, energy, and effort. This gap between early adopters and early majority is where we tend to experience the most frustration, where we are biting on our pencil saying, why aren't people doing the things we need them to do? And that's because this is truly where we need to move away from those traditional communication approaches, which will work up through early adopters, and flip the script towards something that's going to be more meaningful for this early majority audience, more engaging for them on their terms. But once they're on board, you see the rate of adoption is going to start to increase. In the late majority, in the wave scenario, that's me looking around saying, oh goodness, everyone around me is starting to do this. I might as well join. That's what the late majority group is thinking. Thinking, this is happening. I don't want to be the odd person out, but I might as well get on board. Now we have this last group in the corner, the laggards. This is a very difficult group to reach. They either won't join in because they can't, or simply they won't, they don't want to. Another mistake we tend to make is once we have our early adopters on board, we jump right to the laggards and say, okay, we got to get them on board, ignoring these two very large, very important groups, early majority and late majority. Again, the laggards is a really difficult group to reach. My recommendation always is start with the early majority, and then work our way to the laggards. We'll get there eventually. So one of the reasons why I love this theory is certainly we see it play out in our lives over and over again. And that's because underneath it is a very real human nature truth, and that is we are a social herd species. That's why we see this diffusion curve play out in all different kinds of trends and adoption rates around us. As a herd species, we crave belonging and we crave being part of something. This is innate in us. Even us lone wolves out there, this is built into us too. But it helps us understand why the diffusion theory works and helps us understand how we can start and grow our own conservation movements. But this is where we need to get into some more of the specifics of how we can actually do this for our own projects. And the behavioral insights and communication strategies really come into play here. This is our audience. We want them to be moving forward, taking action, making changes, getting actively engaged. But we do need to recognize that there are some things that prevent people from taking action. Very real things, real tangible things, and real emotional, psychological barriers. This is an opportunity to move away from our frustration, where we tend to blame our audience, to getting real about these deterrents and barriers. Some of them may be physical. There's a lack of access to resources or tools. The infrastructure or system isn't in place yet. Or maybe they actually just don't have the skills to do the new thing we're asking them to do. But there's also a host of emotional and psychological deterrents that are also very real. And I have a few of them here. There's a much longer list behind all of this, but this includes things like status quo bias. Status quo bias, simply put, is it's easier for me as the audience to keep doing the things that I always do than do something new or different. I think many of us can relate to that in our own lives as well. Recognizing that what we are asking people to do is something new and different, which takes more time, energy, and effort than whatever it is they're doing now. So we're almost always up against some level of status quo bias. Choice overload occurs when we give our audience too many options of pathways to move forward, and it overwhelms them. It makes them uncertain about which way to go next. And those feelings of overwhelm and uncertainty lead them to not take action. They default back to their status quo bias. Risk aversion. Another way of saying this is fear of change and fear of loss. This certainly comes up when anyone is considering doing something new or different. We start to weigh whether or not we are going to lose out on this, if the trade-off's not going to be beneficial to us. What's at risk for us to do this? So that, again, it's uncertain, it's scary, it's daunting, and these are very real emotional barriers. Lastly, hassle factors. These can be kind of minor inconveniences, like the form to volunteer on our website isn't working quite right. But these minor inconveniences are annoying enough for an audience who's just starting to get engaged, like the early majority, that it can actually turn them off and turn them away to the point where they may not come back. So we want to be mindful of these very real deterrents and barriers, with the goal certainly to reduce and remove them as much as possible. And on the flip side of that, we want to increase the motivation factors for our audience. And partly we can do that by providing those skills and tools and resources to overcome the tangible barriers, but also these emotional motivators to help encourage people to get up out of their seats and moving. Things like social proof, which we covered a lot in the diffusion of innovation theory. Other people are doing this. Maybe I should get in on this too. Empowerment, that feeling that they can do the things that we're asking them to do. They have the ability to do it. And that doing so adds up to making a difference. A sense of belonging, which we all crave, that they're not doing this alone, that the call to change is not just on their individual shoulders, but is part of a larger collective. And benefits, what do they get out of doing these new actions and behaviors? These can be tangible benefits or intrinsic benefits. So making sure they know what's in it for them. So what we're going to look at next is how we can take some of these strategies and apply them to our own work on a regular basis. All of this helps our audience move forward. So I'm going to use an example in the next slides of a movement that actually is starting to grow now. I don't think it's widespread yet, but we can see it happening around us. And that's the movement of more pollinator-friendly yards. We're going to look at some tips and tactics for how we can incorporate these motivators into communication strategies for that movement. The first tip is we want to demonstrate the desired behavior. I mentioned earlier today, we spend too much time focusing on what we don't want people to do. And we can flip that around to focus more on what that desired behavior or action actually looks like, either while it's being done or the end result of it. As humans, and actually as apes, we learn best by watching other people. So we want to spend more time and space showing what that desired behavior looks like, so more and more people can get familiar with it, get comfortable with it, and even start to believe that that's something that they can do as well. Again, it helps us learn what it is that you're asking them to do. Related to this, we can recruit relatable messengers. This helps shift the voice dynamic a little bit. So we move away from kind of top-down, authoritative, you should do this, to hearing from peers. So it's more of a peer-to-peer communication, which is hugely valuable in growing that diffusion curve. Right? The early majority and the late majority, they want to hear from one another. So you can recruit relatable messengers that share their experiences, share why they enjoy gardening and planting. So they can really talk authentically about why it's meaningful for them, which is more likely to relate and resonate with other members of the audience. Like Sally here, I don't consider myself a gardener, so I really appreciate that my rain garden is low maintenance. That would really resonate with a lot of folks who maybe don't consider themselves to be gardeners, but are willing to take action towards this desired behavior. And that's a message that would be hard to come from our own organization, but in a peer-to-peer way, it really resonates. And I do want to share that partly why those two methods are so powerful is because they have the use of dynamic norms beneath them. You might be familiar with a term called descriptive norms. And that's a more quantitative message of saying how many people have already done a behavior. Like 75% of people who stay in this hotel room reuse their towels. So dynamic norms is related to that, but it takes a different approach. Rather than saying how many people have already achieved something, which is great if your behavior is in that late majority stage and you have 75% of people doing something already. Most of us don't have those numbers on our side. So rather, we can describe the movement that's starting to happen. And when we demonstrate that desired behavior and recruit relatable messengers, it helps to do that. And here's a quote from Greg Sparkman, who actually published a paper on dynamic norms. And I'll share a link to how you can access that paper later. Just learning that other people are changing can instigate all these psychological processes that motivate further change. People can begin to think that change is possible, that change is important, and that in the future, the norms will be different. So just hearing that things are starting to shift, that more and more people are trying to do something different, helps your audience get ready, willing, and able to also do something different. Now, sometimes our audience truly actually just needs additional support to do this. They need the resources, the guidance, and the tools to be able to follow through on what we're asking them to do. And we can't safely assume that the audience is going to do all this work on their own and figure it out and do their research. So it's really helpful if we go that extra mile and take that extra step to provide resources to our audience that will help them do this and even empower them to do it on their own. This can be things like checklists. Make sure you have everything you need to get started, or a calendar of activities so they know what they should be doing when. Even providing the starter kit so they can have the tools and resources at the go and get started and feel like they are prepared to get going. It can even mean offering a service where people come out to your garden and see what should go where and how and when you should do it. So again, going that extra step to really help the audience build the skills, give them the tools and guidance they need, will lead to greater empowerment to help them follow through on it for the long term. We want to invite the audience to become part of something bigger. Again, we crave that sense of belonging. So it's helpful to know that we're not alone, that it's not just us doing this. And we can send those signals and those cues that other people around you are starting to do this as well, whether it's a pollinator-friendly garden or people participating in No Mow May. Part of that for us is making these behaviors more visible. Some of these behaviors are sort of inside the house behaviors, so how do we make it more external and more visible? And we want to help our audience feel good about the impact they're having. This is really an important piece, the sort of feedback loops, the updates, and the mechanisms to know how is it all adding up. And impact can mean a lot of different things to different folks, so you want to know what's meaningful to your audience. Maybe it's seeing that next generation of gardeners get excited to get their hands in the dirt. Maybe it's the fact that my own garden leveled up and became a certified wildlife habitat. Maybe seeing the impact we're having across a region of bringing more pollinators to the area because of my individual garden. These things are really impactful, and they give that dose of validation that the time, effort, and energy I put into doing this new thing is adding up to making a difference, is creating collective change. And lastly, as much as we can, and it's certainly where appropriate, let's have some fun with this. We can move away from doom and gloom and into fun. Like a cool mom is a native plant mom. Like we can go wild in our yards. If we can host a pollinator celebration meal. I would really love it if someone invited me to one of those meals. So if you're having one, please keep me in mind. And I truly believe that we're all capable of making these shifts in our communication and outreach approaches. Maybe we don't have communication backgrounds or marketing backgrounds. That's fine. We don't need that. We just need to make these small strategic shifts away from our traditional approaches towards ones that will further engage, inspire, motivate, and activate more of that early majority and late majority audiences who are actually open and willing to do more if we relate to them in a way that's really going to resonate. And again, we can do that by making it social, making it safe, making it meaningful, making it impactful, and making it fun. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch this video, join this conference. I hope you will join us for the live keynote and panel discussion. I'll be there for that as well. I put together some resources on my website that I'd love for you to check out, in particular for this talk and this conference at brooketully.com/FIPS. There you can find resources on dynamic norms and some of the other topics I brought up today. I also put together a little bit of a fun quiz to help you assess why some of our traditional communication approaches, like the ones I shared earlier in this presentation, aren't working hard enough for us. So try your hand at that, and certainly please reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much.